Follow Shadow Junior Twin.
Hey everybody, hope we're all doing amazing. Today we're going to briefly cover global and local variables. This is going to be quite a short video. I don't think there's much to cover. They're quite simple, but they come up quite a lot in 9 markers. I'm going to go over them more when I do 9 markers specifically because they are quite a common 9 marker, but that'll be in a separate video. I'm just going to go over what they are and how they work, and that will be all you need to know. But applying that in 9 markers, that'll be in a later video. So, 120 days left, good pace, keep going, part 7, let's go. So, what actually are global and local variables? So, local variables are variables that can only be accessed within the specified part of a program, whether this is a subroutine it's defined in, or if they're passed into a subroutine and they were defined outside the subroutine, right? So, essentially what this means is that they cannot be accessed throughout the whole program unless they are passed into every subroutine, you know? And then a global variable, on the other hand, can be accessed throughout the whole program. It doesn't need to be passed into any subroutine at all. It can still be accessed and changed, even without being passed as a parameter, meaning it has global scope. So, what actually are the benefits and drawbacks of this? Before I talk about that, I actually need to go into what you can do with local variables. There's 2 different things you can do. You can pass by reference, and you can pass by value. Now, passing by reference is quite intuitive with its definition. You're referencing the original variable, right? You're passing a pointer to the location of the variable, the memory location, meaning that any changes made within the subroutine affect the variable outside the subroutine, right? If you pass a variable into a subroutine by reference, and let's say its original value was 5, and then in the subroutine you do variable plus 3 equals variable plus 3, and that will obviously be 8. This affects the original variable because you're passing by reference, not passing by value. What passing by value does is it passes a copied version of the variable into the subroutine. For example, if I take in a variable which has a value of 5, I add 3 to it and then return it, the original variable still has the value of 5, but I'm returning 8. I'm altering the variable within the subroutine, but the original variable outside the subroutine isn't being changed. That's what passing by value means. So, what are the benefits and drawbacks of local variables? So since you're only affecting them within the subroutines they are defined in or passed into, it's easier to debug, right? You don't have to check every single subroutine, you only have to check subroutines they are defined in or passed into. Additionally, you're going to deal with less bugs because they're only accessible in certain places. You don't have to write code that affects these variables fully all throughout the program. You're only writing code that affects these variables within their specified subroutines, you know? So you have to worry about them less, so it's going to lead to less bugs. They're also more memory efficient because these variables only exist on the stack when the subroutine is being executed. When that subroutine is finished and it returns a value, or it's finished and it's a procedure and it just ends, and it's no longer on the stack, this variable is gone too, meaning that it's not occupying memory anymore. The drawbacks is, once the variable ends, this variable is gone. Once the subroutine ends, the variable is gone. So, of course, if you want to use a variable that is used throughout the program on multiple subroutines, and it is affected by different subroutines in different ways, this can be an issue because once a subroutine ends, that variable is no longer on the stack anymore, it's no longer being used in memory. Another drawback is that it can lead to parameter heavy code. If you need to pass variables into subroutines in every single subroutine you write, it can lead to a lot of different parameters you have to deal with and keep track of, which can be complicated to write. So, what are the benefits and drawbacks of global variables? So, they're easy to access throughout the whole program, right? You're able to access them and edit them throughout any subroutine without being passed as parameter within just sequences of code outside any subroutine, which is your main sequence of code. You can alter it in like under any circumstances, right? Basically, you can just alter it anywhere. And that's a benefit if it's a variable that is being used frequently, whether it's a constant. If you have pi in your program, obviously that's a constant which doesn't be changed, and it's probably going to be accessed everywhere. So you can make it a global variable. Or if you're using a variable that literally just needs to be used everywhere, like maybe a grid for a board game, that's going to be altered in many, many places, so you might make it global. And this benefit kind of ties into this one, but you don't have to pass this parameter. Your code's going to be less complicated, less parameter heavy, it's easier to write and debug. Not debug, sorry, easier to write and maintain. There is an issue with debugging though, which is here. Anyways, subroutines can accidentally alter global variables. Both of these are about debugging in a sense. A subroutine can accidentally alter a global variable which wasn't meant to because you can't reuse variable names anymore because it will alter the original variable that you defined. You have to be very careful when you use global variables because it can cause overriding with variable clash names, but also could mean that you accidentally alter a global variable in a subroutine which you didn't even know about. And this is an issue because when you debug your code, it's a lot harder to debug because you have to debug your entire program. If we go back here, it's easy to debug because you only have to check the subroutines, but global variables, you have to debug the whole program. Anyways, it's hard to scale. As program grows, variable names can clash, causing unexpected overrides to happen. This could happen when you're dealing with a very, very complicated program that maybe calls multiple board games on multiple boards, but you can't use the same board variable name because that can cause a clash or an override. It's also less memory efficient, as since it's running throughout the program as while it's being executed, it is always occupying memory, making it less memory efficient than a local variable, which terminates when the subroutine terminates. So, past paper questions. Let's just breeze through these quickly. So, number of words is a parameter passed by value. Describe the difference between passing by parameter and passing by value. Nice and simple. Passing by reference passes the memory location of the original variable, while passing by value just passes a copy of the variable into the function. Nice and easy, right? We went through this just a couple minutes ago, so let's look at the mark scheme, right? So by reference, the function receives the memory location, same, and by value, the function receives a copy of the variable. And there's many different words you could say, but they're all conveying the same idea. Anyway, so look at another question. Also, yeah, these global and local variables do typically come up in 9 markers, but I'm gonna go for that separately. I already mentioned this. Anyways, give one benefit and one drawback of declaring the array as a global variable instead of a local variable. By the array, this is a part of a question, so the array was mentioned earlier, but you don't actually need to know the context of this for this question. So it's just asking us what is the benefit and drawback of global variables and local variables. So accessible throughout the whole program, doesn't need to be passed into subroutines, so it's easy to write, right? And the drawback is harder to debug the program as the variable can be altered anywhere, causing unwanted effects. So here's the mark scheme. Variable doesn't need to be passed by a parameter, you don't need to return a value, blah, blah, blah. Can be accessed from any function, so that's my benefit there. Drawback is that here, alterations within the function may have unwanted side effects elsewhere in the program, right? Because you could be trying to use this variable for something else, but you didn't realize that when you used it in this subroutine, it actually affected it, and it didn't just change in the subroutine, it changed the whole program, causing unwanted effects, right? And then of course there's the drawback of increased memory usage, which we talked about earlier. But yeah, these are quite nice questions. However, you see this more in you see these come up more in 9 markers, which I'm going to go through separately. But when I do, I'm going to go over these again. Anyways, thank you for listening.